Work with children with speech sound disorders. I'm going to begin this episode by saying you are welcome because today I am going to address a very common problem in speech sound disorders that is simply never discussed. I am betting that you have a child on your caseload right now that has these issues with asthma and speech sound disorders that we're going to cover today. I'm going to help you unpack this and we're going to discuss what we're going to do about this. And I'm going to be very transparent about the limitations in research and about what I know and how I know it and what it's going to look like in the field and what it's going to look like on your back porch and how we can do something different. So get ready, roll up your sleeves. We're going to dig in the dirt and we're going to get our hands really, really dirty on asthma and speech sound disorders and what we need to know and what we're going to do differently. This is where things get really exciting because where the research, where it stops, where its limitations are, is where the practitioner begins. This is where you really need to have skin in the game. This is really, you really only know these things if you work very closely with the child, if you work very, very closely with the details of the practice, because the details of the practice is what's going to matter if you're going to be effective in assessing these children and in treating these children. So take notes. I think this is one that you're really going to need to know tomorrow because I'm sure that you have someone on your caseload that is following this pattern. And if you do, make sure to shoot me an email. Tell me about what you're experiencing on your back porch. This is something that I would actually love to research after I get my doctorate. It would be very easy to research, and it's a detail that really matters that's really going to impact our practice in the field of speech sound disorders. I actually think this is a topic that should be, and it's not in my speech sound disorder book currently, but in every textbook, there should be an entire chapter devoted to the subject of asthma and speech sound disorders. Let me dive in and tell you why. So to start off with, we're going to talk about over 330,000 children that were researched in a 2016 study out of Northwestern. So they looked at the medical files of children with asthma, and they found that they are more likely to have speech sound disorders. And it had to do with the severity of the asthma as well. So children with severe asthma were up to 12 times more likely to have a speech sound disorder. We know there is a connection. Now, the research ends there. There was a 2006 study on speech sound disorders that also found that asthma connection in the sense of voicing disorders. So we know there's a voicing issue associated with asthma. We know that it's a relationship between asthma and speech sound disorders, but that's where the research ends. So this is where if you have skin in the game, if you work really closely with our little professors in the field, you're going to find that these are kiddos that DSD. They do something different. And I always think of the love song of Alfred J. Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. When kids do something different and they break the laws of speech development, and I look at them and I say, do you dare disturb the universe? And that's what these children with asthma do, and I'm going to tell you how. We covered the first aspect of the evidence-based practice triangle, which was the research. And what we know from the research is there's a relationship. And the relationship is if the child has asthma, they're more likely to have speech sound disorders, or they're more likely to have voicing difficulties. And the more severe the asthma, the greater the likelihood of the speech sound disorder. So there's a connection, and that's what we know. But what do we know when we're in the field, we have skin in the game, and we work really closely with these children and we're assessing their speech development closely under the magnifying glass that we do and understanding them is this. I'm going to tell you my own experience from my own back porch because these children dare disturb the universe. And the way they dare disturb the universe, you're going to see, is in the beginning of words, the initial position of words. And I'm going to tell you what you're going to see in the initial position of words and why. Now, when I dive into this, This is because Kelly Vest said so. This is practitioner experience. It's something. It's not researched on large populations. It doesn't generalize to your back porch. You need to study what's happening on your back porch. But I'm going to tell you what's happening on my back porch, and I'm going to tell you my hypothesis on why that is. So the first thing I'm seeing on my back porch is I'm seeing that even though it looks like a phonological process. So the phonological process I'm seeing, for instance, is stopping. They're stopping the airflow. So instead of the F sound, they're going to stop it, and they're producing the B because they're voicing the B sound. Instead of the V, they're producing the B sound. So they're stopping that airflow. Instead of the S sound or the Z sound, they're producing the D sound. So they're stopping the airflow. So all of those continuate airflow sounds, the airflow is being stopped. Now, this is where things get gnarly. If it was a phonological process, it would occur in the initial position of words, it would occur in the medial position of words, it would occur in the final position of words. It occurs across the positions of words. However, what I'm finding with my children with asthma issues, it's happening in the initial position of words. 0% accuracy. They are stopping all of the fricative sounds. They are 0% accurate. When I look at the medial position of words after the vowels, 100% accurate. When I'm looking at the final position of words, 100% accurate. Now, this is not a phonological process in which they're stopping airflow across context. It's only happening in the initial position of words. So I'm thinking of my love song of Alfred J. Prufrock, "We're Having a Moment. Do you dare disturb the universe?" It just makes you drool how fun our job is when our kiddos break the rules of speech development. And I'm going to tell you why. Because this is where we have a physiological component, perhaps. It's not linguistics. There might be linguistic, but there's a physiological component that's feeding into it. And that physiological component is there's a lack of subglottal air pressure. So when we produce a continuant sound, that means you need continuous airflow coming from the respiratory system. If you have diminished airflow because of a significant case of asthma, it's going to be very difficult. So after you produce a vowel in the medial position of the word or in the final position of the word, it gets easy because the vowel you have, with the vowel you have the vocal folds, which are moving. The vocal folds are moving, so that means they're creating the airflow pressure by closing and opening, right? You have the airflow gliding over the mouth easily. So this is easier onset to produce. You have that airflow going, you have the voicing going, which is easier than the voiceless, and therefore you are able to produce that friction airflow sound in the middle of the words and at the end of the words. However, it's hard to produce in the beginning of words. So that's where you go from 100%, 100%, 0%. Is this linguistic? Maybe there's something more at play. So when you're seeing this child has asthma and they're breaking the rules, they're disturbing the universe. They're producing F, S, Z, S, sh, ja, affricates, fricatives. They're producing 100% in the middle and the end of the words, and they're 0% in the beginning of words. That's when you think this is more than a phonological process. There's more at play. Now, once again, I'm going to temper that in saying this is a hypothesis. This is something based on my understanding of physiology, my understanding of the child I'm working with, and my understanding of phonological processes and how they develop. You're going to see this perhaps with these stopping airflow sounds. Another one that's hard is fronting. Now, the reason fronting is hard is you have to retract that tongue and get total tongue closure and release. Ka, ga. Once again, that means you need that air pressure in order to produce the K and the G in the beginning of words. You don't have the help of the vowel to get that airflow moving, to get that voicing moving so that you get the pressure you need. We don't have that subglottal pressure, okay? It's in the beginning of the word. Okay, start, initiate, do hard things with airflow. And once again, you're going to see the child's 100% on suppressing fronting at the end of words and in the middle of words. There, after the vowels, 100%. You go, do you dare disturb the universe? Yes, you do. 0% in the beginning of words. So when they look at me, my name is not Miss Kelly. My name is, of course, it's going to be Dally. We have a lack of respiratory support, and that is resulting in this being a physiological issue that's due to asthma. So other kids don't do that. Sure, you can say, oh, the K and G tends to develop first at the end of the words. Yeah, it's not 100%, 0%, and it's not that way persistently. So it's been this way all year. Things are not moving along, even though we're working on it at the initial position of words. It's not happening. It might be part linguistic, but there's a physiologic component due to insufficient respiratory support that's going into play here as well. The third thing that you're likely going to see if you have a child with significant asthma is voicing errors. Why is that? Voiceless is hard in the initial position of words. So you're going to see it most prevalent in the initial position of words. Voiceless means that your vocal folds are open, they're abducted. That means that you have to produce more airflow in order to produce voiceless sounds. When the vocal folds are closed, when they're in the voicing position and they open up because of the airflow, they create subglottal pressure. They create that airflow pressure by them being closed. When you have them opened, right, now you have to produce more airflow. It's harder. So what you're going to see with these children is not only, so you're like, oh yeah, I know children linguistically, they do that. They do that with the oral stops. They do that with the pa, da, pa, ta, and ka. They tend to voice those because aspiration is hard. No, it's bigger than that. These children are voicing all of the sounds. So every sound they're producing, they are voicing. When you do get them to produce the S and you're using your multimodal cueing, which is best practice, so don't throw that out. Still do that, right? The S. What's coming out from them is Z. And why is that coming out from them? Because of insufficient respiratory support. It's much easier to have the vocal folds moving because the vocal folds give you that respiratory support. You're going to see more voicing in the beginning of words once again. It's hard to start speech. The starting is the hardest part. After you get those vowels going, the vowels help out. So you're going to say, oh, I hear less voicing when it comes to the medial in the final position words. There's more voicing in the beginning of words. So you're seeing these patterns in the beginning of words that you're not used to seeing with phonological processes. All of these things I've told you, we call them phonological processes. Fronting is a phonological process. Stopping is a phonological process. Voicing is a phonological process, but that occurs across positions. When we have in the initial position of words, a child with asthma, when they're like 0% there, and when we go post-vocalic, when we have the help of airflow that vowels provide, and we go to 100%. And you've been working on these processes. You've been doing best practice. You're doing my approach, which is as good as it gets. You're doing the DTTC and you're doing the complex clusters. You're doing all the things, right? And you're at 80% accuracy and you're still 0% on the beginning of words. Things are working in the beginning words. There's likely a physiological component to that. is simply because it has not been researched does not mean that this is not likely a phenomenon that you're coming across on a daily basis. This is why it's really important to always consider the research triangle. This is the research we have available that's peer reviewed, and that's fabulous, but there's limitations to that. We have to take that research and you have to take your own practical experience and you have to study your practical experience methodically. When you see these patterns, you have to take note. And then after that, you have to look at the child and the child's contributing factor because we're going to hit the other side of the triangle next. But before we do, there's one more thing that you're going to see with children with significant asthma that you're not going to see in the healthy population. You're going to see difficulty with the H. I'm going to say H so you understand on the podcast. It's the glottal fricative ha. Now, this is, many would say, the easiest sound to produce, which is why we laugh, ha 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 ha. However, this is not the case if the child has asthma. If they have insufficient respiratory support, you're putting the airflow through a fricative state, which means you have to sustain it, and the glottis, ha 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 ha. What these children will do is often delete it in the initial position of words. So you're going to hear them say, for instance, instead of hi, they'll say I. There's no H there. It's deleted in the beginning of the words. They go right for the vowel. So this is another thing that you're going to see with children that have asthma and speech sound disorders. The H, which is so easy. How is it you're able to produce the R in the final position of words and the Z and all of these later developing sounds in the J, but you can't produce the H, the ha, which is the laughing, ha ha, easy sound, just rolls off your tongue. Once again, we have to think physiologically. When we leave the rules of how language develop, that's when we understand there is a physiological component. And when we understand that physiological component, we know to DSD, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, where we have to do something different because it's just not going to naturally develop like it does for other kiddos. Let's dive into what are you going to see from the child? And I'm thinking of one of my professors right now that just is schooling me of a very, very bright child, looking at these physiological pieces. That's going to be the other area of the triangle. And also if the parent tells you, oh, his asthma has been really, really bad lately. We've had to do a lot of breathing treatments with him. He wasn't sleeping last night because of his asthma acting up. And maybe you see in the fall and in the spring, you're going to see fluctuations. So you're going to see, he's got the H. We've worked on the H, and we've done what we talked about before. We're going to actually not take the H for granted and say, oh, this is going to naturally develop. It's the easiest sound of the language. We're working on 3-element clusters because it doesn't, because it's physiological. So we're going to now say, okay, we're working on the H. We're going to go, hive. And we're going to sustain it for a really, really long time. And I even like the prompt approach in which you press on the chest, ha, so they can feel that airflow coming. They put their hands on their chest, ha, hi. And then they come back after spring vacation and the H is gone, right? Like, why is that? And that could be because it's allergy season and they're all stuffed up. So they have less respiratory support. They have asthma combined, clear snot coming out in every direction. So then it's like, well, what's happening? You had the H and now you don't have it. It's fluctuating. You don't see that fluctuation when it's linguistic. If it's physiological, you are. When their asthma is acting up, their speech is going to nosedive. And when their asthma is under control, you're going to see improvements. Now, you're not going to see that if it's purely linguistic. It makes sense that he's a professor. One thing you're going to see is mouth breathing at rest. They want to get air in there because of the asthma. Another thing you're going to see is chin jutting, where it's just like, any way to keep that mouth open and the airflow getting more air in because of their asthma. Their head, it might be forward like this. Like this is another way to kind of get more air in, is kind of to get more air in. So you're not seeing a good posture. You're seeing the head forward, seeing the mouth open, you're seeing the chin jutted. This is not optimal posture. And now we're going to have to think about that posture and like, okay, let's open up our chest, big open chest. Another thing you might see from the child is you might see that when the child has worse allergies, the speech is worse. So when you see the child and they have like the clear boogers coming out and all of that good stuff, you may see that their speech is declining. Like I said, those things that we think of as these are the phonological processes, and these are processes that the child has mastered, and you're like, oh, is the child regressing? It's really the child can't produce the K and G because they don't have the respiratory support in the initial position to do it. Or they can't produce the H because they don't have the respiratory support because they're all stuffed up. So you're seeing from the child, you got the clear boogers and everything, and the speech is taking a nosedive. So you're thinking there is a physiological component here. It's not just not linguistic. Another thing that you might see, effortful speech. What I see from the child that I work with, like for right now, is I see a tense neck when he's speaking. It's a lot of effort to speak, and he's using his body to speak. So it's almost like what we do when we're yelling at someone, where you see like the neck veins, and you kind of see the shoulders moving to exert your voice. I see more exertion happening in the body to simply speak at the conversational level at a regular volume. They're exerting a lot more effort, as you can see in their body and in their neck and their jaw, a lot more tension. It's a lot harder for them to produce the speech. You're seeing fluctuations when the child is stuffed up, and then suddenly phonological processes that were suppressed have now reemerged, especially in the beginning of words. And like I said, with the body posture, you're seeing mouth breathing to get more air in, chin jutting, or they have their head hang down to get more air in. It's just physiological. So I'm going to end this on saying, how are we going to do something different? And this is something where it's like, I'm with you. What's fun about this field is you're always learning. You're always not only seeing new phenomenon, because the children school you when they dare disturb the universe and break the rules, like the children with autism do when they develop speech. That's another population because of neurological differences. They break the rules of speech sound development, and then that causes you to do something different, or you're not going to be effective. With this population, we can't take for granted, because it's not going to work, that they're naturally going to develop these sounds in the initial position of words because it's linguistic. Because my hypothesis is it might also be physiological, okay, because they're not following the rules of it being linguistic. And what we're going to have to do then is we're going to have to do something different. And the best thing to do is to do what they're doing. So what they're showing us is I'm able to produce speech when I have the vowels going. I'm able to produce the K, the G, the stop sound, the H, all of these sounds. I can produce them if they're followed by a vowel. So the next step is to say, okay, what if we let's start with the vowel and say the word. So for instance, if the word is sun, what if you say, for instance, sun, sun. And we're going to put the word a before all the things. Okay, maybe that's not working. Okay, well, we know you can produce the S at the end of the words. So what if every word we say, for instance, or you're producing the Z at the end of the words. So what if every word we say is sun, is this, is that? What if we said yes, yes, sun? So you're saying the S at the end of the word, which you can do, and then we're going to put it in the beginning of the word right after it. So we say, oh, okay, you can say the word F at the end of the words. So what if, like, for instance, we say off, and then whatever the word is, fun, off for, off, sliding it off the table when you do it. This is all new territory and it's uncomfortable doing new things, but we've got a DSD now, right? We can't just say, okay, I know how to work with phonologic processes. What I do is I do the complexity approach and I do DTTC and I do all of these wonderful things with natural words and this and that, multimodal cueing. But then we're like, there's a physiological component. So we have to do something different. And at first, you're awkward at it. But then you're very quickly going to learn what works and what doesn't work. So preschoolers are really good at schooling you really quickly on what's effective and what isn't effective. So you look at the child and you say, okay, when can you produce these sounds? You can produce them when they're after vowels. All right, so let's start with a vowel and then introduce these sounds in the beginning of the words. And then afterwards, we can insert a pause that goes longer and longer between the vowel and the word. So then you're actually starting it at the beginning of the word. Let's do the same thing as the end of the word. You can say things at the end of the word. So we'll say a word and at the end. So it's a yes, son. Yes, feel. We're saying it at the end of the word and we're connecting it to the beginning of the word. And then we'll insert a pause that goes longer and longer. So that at the end they're saying yes, seal. Yes, sun. So these are things we're going to do because we see the child as 100% when it's followed by a vowel. We see the child as 100% at the end or the middle words. So we're going to capitalize on that. And we're going to say, this is how we get these sounds into play. And then over time, with this using what we know works, which is this 80% challenge point, keeping them 4 out of 5 times, and then we're going to make sure they're accurate at that level. We're going to challenge them over time and increase the space between the words so that eventually they are actually producing it on their own in the initial position of words. So this is how we're going to DST. I want you to do what you do best, which is to roll up your sleeves and make the world a better place, one child at a time. You will always be first.